Greetings. Though you may be more familiar with my voice than my face, I am pianist and NPR host Christopher O'Reilly. I hope you and yours are bearing up well and healthily during this pandemic. We're all suddenly plunged into a challenging new life, seeking out the many ways we must remake ourselves to serve our needs and those of our community. I'm sure you'll agree that this enforced solitude has been a great opportunity for meditation, reevaluation, reinvigoration. Personally, as someone who has always dreamed of making my home the place where I would never need to leave, I have my beautiful instruments, all my books and movies and recordings, and all kinds of nice things to look at in the house, my paintings and photographs, and the means of online production, great high-tech equipment. And so my question has been, in this pandemic, how long do I get to stay in my house uninterrupted? I've come to share with you my latest projects and a request and an invitation. I welcome and would appreciate any thoughts and reactions you have to my program, as well as feedback on any of my ideas that you would find suitable for collaboration. These last couple of years I've been in a quarantine of my own devising, monastically cloistered with my work on Johann Sebastian Bach's The Well-Tempered Clavier, recording both books on my beloved Steinway CD 207, was a favorite of Alicia De La Rocha's back in the day, and before it went into retirement in California with me, its last gig was touring with Billy Joel. My performances of the complete Well-Tempered Clavier are streaming now on YouTube and at ChristopherO'Reilly.com. In tandem, I've created a 96-episode series of explorations into each of the Preludes and Fugues of the Well-Tempered Clavier, entitled Everything We Need to Know About Playing the Piano We Learn from the Well-Tempered Clavier. My work with Bach over the last years had its light bulb moment and its inspiration as I was reading John Eliot Gardner's Music in the Castle of Heaven, his biography of J.S. Bach, as well as his chronicle of his own work, his immersion in Bach's work and its performance. I do most of my reading on my Stairmaster, and how much more inspiring was it and invigorating to be reading John Eliot's book and listening to the complete works of Bach recorded by my favorite conductor, Nicholas Harnoncourt. My main takeaway from reading the Gardner book with Harnoncourt's period performances ringing in my ears was that Bach was predominantly a composer of vocal music. I believe that can be said as well of Mozart, Schubert, and maybe even Brahms. Surprisingly, so much of his work was for chorus. We are often debating the efficacy and integrity of performing Bach's works for keyboard on the modern piano as opposed to the keyboard instruments of his time, the harpsichord, the clavichord, and an early version of the piano. But that question of historical integrity becomes moot when we think of this music as primarily vocal, and we realize that the notes that we see on the page have as many articulations, durations, as there are consonants in the German language and their connections and elisions. That the various parameters of musical notation each present their own bouquet of variety and possibility. Let's look at a staccato eighth note. If you were to present that eighth note staccato to me in a Prokofiev sonata or a Stravinsky piece, I would say, how short do you want it? And we often look at that marking and try and make it as atom smasher short as we possibly can. But if you were presenting a staccato eighth note to my friend Sir James Galway in his years as principal flute of the Berlin Philharmonic, a staccato eighth note is a very specific marking. Staccato denotes half the printed length. So between the atomic shortness of our Prokofiev eighth note staccato and the relative languor of basically a 16th note, a full 16th note on the other end of the scale, that's really quite a range of possibility. We can apply this variety of articulation and duration to create its own sense of climax, its own sense of an arc, a phrase, maybe starting with the shortest of the 16th notes at their most Prokofiev-like incision, and proceed to create a more and more lyric line by making them incrementally, one at a time, longer, so that we end up with a lyric cantabile staccato eighth note, if you like. The revelation and responsibility inherent in our focus on articulative variety. Each voice can, indeed, each voice must have its own articulative arc, its own unique articulative profile. So important and useful, particularly in Bach, as the way we distinguish and create foreground and background out of our voices need no longer be a matter of dynamic terracing. It can be a matter of personality, a transparency of sound, that one line might have a more legato touch and the other might be of a more fleeting and light diaphanous quality. It's the distinction between the voices and our choices, our experimentation in arriving at those articulative decisions as contrasts and complements to the other voice that we really create our own very, very personal atmosphere and interpretation. As pianists and in ensembles, we have a tendency, we have an ingrained instinct towards creating balance out of making sounds of voices that are playing at equal volume. But is a forte dynamic, for instance, an invitation or a prescription to play every note in that passage forte? I prefer to think of dynamic areas as areas of endeavor. Most importantly, areas in which the noted dynamic is the culmination and the combination of disparate dynamic elements. I think of the great singing sound of Vladimir Horowitz. How did he do it? How did he get that signature and eternally singing line? Well, the nuts and bolts of it, as far as I have discovered, is that if we were in a Chopin nocturne and we've got the marking mezzo piano cantabile, Horowitz would play that melody probably close to a very healthy forte, but his treatment of the accompaniment, of the support from underneath, would be of such diaphanous and pianissimo character and sound that it would make such a great foreground for the melodic line as to make it sing. And the resultant, the consequent dynamic would certainly be construable as mezzo piano cantabile. Even though Bach rarely made any dynamic marks in his works, we can use dynamic arcs. We can use each line's particular and distinctive dynamic arc as independent. If we have two lines of counterpoint, they need not have the same climax. We have to take each voice on its own merits, discover its own peaks, and also allow it another type of entrance other than declaiming its place on stage. There's no reason, unless there's an accent, and Bach never wrote any accents, for the first note to be the loudest of a particular group or phrase. The slur in Bach's music is only rarely used, but has some very specific suggestions for execution. We see slurs as matters of making a very seamless legato, a connection. In a Chopin work of slurs with 8 bars in length, it's kind of hard to imagine how anything could be more frustrating than trying to make all of those notes so smoothly and seamlessly connected. In Bach's time, it had the technical suggestion of overholding. Let's say if we have a group of 4/16 notes, if they had a slur on them, there would be the suggestion for overholding for a couple of reasons. One was that by holding the fingers down, we could somewhat mask the percussive striking of the note on the harpsichord, taking the edges off of the notes that way, but also creating a damper pedal of the hand, so that we're going to gather this sonority of all 4 notes. And that can be an expressive element, how connected and how disconnected we make them, how long we overhold, if we overhold the whole pattern, if we overhold 1 into 2 and then 2 into 3. It's completely up to us. But there is a great variety inherent in there. The 2-note slur is an even greater suggestion, a greater font of experimentation and exploration. Beethoven used 2-note slurs a lot, and Arthur Schnabel is probably the best disciple in his recordings of the Beethoven sonatas. The 2-note slur, Schnabel would play very clipped, very close together, as if it were just a broken dyad. And it would also have, and this would be a suggestion from Bach's time as well, the beginning of the slur would have a strong impulse, which would be followed by a more yielding, a weaker impulse. Strong, weak, strong, weak. And on the piano, we can execute this dynamically, connectively, but dynamically is a very, very hard road to hoe. With all of these slurs, it's a matter of strong, weak, and really making that a palpable thing. And that in itself creates its own sense of transparency when we're not completely married to the idea of just playing these 2 notes together. What more do you want? Make that dynamic component a part of the equation, and it becomes a much more palpable and expressive tool. And in the end, what is a slur? Is a slur an invitation to play seamlessly legato? What about all those Chopin slurs of 8 bars length? Are they all supposed to be similarly smooth and legato? Over the history of musical notation, if we were to ask for a definitive definition of what a slur means, it can only mean these notes belong together. It is up to us to discover and explore which of these notes are best connected smoothly and which are leaps perhaps that need a little bit more space between the bottom and the top. This is very much from the vocal impulse. We are deciding what the consonants are, what the notes, what the letters, what the words are connective and what are declamatory. Within the umbrella of the slur, these notes belong together. There are many ways that they can belong together. It's up to us to discover how. With Bach's music, we are presented with the tabula rasa of the score, a blank slate nearly entirely free of any notation or direction of articulation, connection, or dynamics. Bach left it up to the sensitive, tasteful performer to know and utilize all of the parameters of articulation, dynamics, and connection to make their own way through these pieces. But this must be in the service of creating distinction and differentiation between voices and not conformity. Complementing and contrasting articulative, durational, inertial, and dynamic arcs should be our responsibility, our expanded opportunity for freedom of variation and invention between voices. All 96 episodes of the series have now been completed, a process that spanned a 9-month period. I have thus far offered it exclusively on a subscription basis. But this late episode I'm particularly proud of, so I'm offering it to you. The link is enclosed in our email. It's episode 91 on the Prelude number 22 in B-flat minor in Book 2. I've always envisioned repurposings of this series, perhaps at some point as a couple of massive ebooks, one on each book, 1 and 2, perhaps as a podcast, perhaps as a YouTube subscription channel or iTunes. But in light of recent quarantine protocols, it almost appears as if I've been preparing for this online imperative moment for a very long time. I want the series to be available to schools to use as an online reference. One of my subscribers recently invited me to participate in a couple of hours of online lectures associated with the series. Robert Henry from Kennesaw State University in Georgia wanted me to talk for an hour about the program and how I came up with the idea for it and what I learned in the process. And we had some questions and answers after that. And then we had a second hour, which was an online masterclass with 3 students who had prepared pieces of Bach. We went through them and tried to open some doors of possibility, and we all had a really good time. Doing the presentation at my Hollywood home on my favorite Steinway was like a dream for me, to be in my space and to be able to offer and present the information and also the means by which we can make these sounds that I'm hoping we can strive for. And the excitement at this new portal of perspective that I'm offering, the encouragement and empowering of a personal sense of freedom reigned with discernment and responsibility was palpable in that online experience. I envision the series, the archive, as one element in a program that I'm calling Christopher O'Reilly's School of Bach. Access to the 40-plus hours of instruction and exploration, 96 episodes encompassing all of the Preludes and Fugues, would be the cornerstone of a course of online and in-person sessions, master classes, and seminars on Bach or any music, taking into account my title for the series, culminating in 2 live concerts, performances of both books of the Well-Tempered Clavier by student participants and myself. Looking back on my near year of meditation and production, I realize I've created the most performance-immersive body of work addressing the Well-Tempered Clavier. More essential, and what excites me most of all, is that I am offering a completely new perspective on how to view any musical score, to acknowledge the rigors of notation, but also the broad scope of varietal possibility inherent in the score, of personal freedom in realizing the ambiguity inherent in all the parameters of musical notation. I'm not putting forth my interpretations as ideal or to be emulated. I am offering the tools so that pianists can experiment and find their own way through this vastly expanded perspective. The unique legacy of my program is this invitation to a more intimate and boundlessly liberated point of view, engendering a whole new world of interpretive and imaginative possibility. I would love to have your thoughts and responses to the concept and would be honored to be of service in whatever form will best serve you and your community. Thanks for watching.